Tom Osborne remains a Nebraska icon. 3 national championships, a near-mythic record at the University of Nebraska from 1973 to 1997, and later a U.S. representative for the 3rd District, 2001 to 2007. Nebraskans still revere him as the stoic, moral leader who embodied Midwestern values. Yet beneath the trophies and the carefully cultivated image lies a pattern of criticisms that receive far less public airtime than debates over his option offense or recruiting hauls. These lesser-discussed charges paint a portrait of success built more on fortunate timing, systemic advantages, and ethical gray areas than unassailable genius or virtue. They extend from the football program's underbelly to public campaigns, charitable endeavors, pandemic messaging, and congressional votes that carried lethal consequences. This essay examines those deeper, more damning dimensions. Football success, circumstance, chemistry, and the unspoken edge. Osborne's era coincided with a college football landscape uniquely suited to Nebraska's strengths. The 1980s and 1990s favored power running, line of scrimmage dominance, traits that played to the physical profile of large, strong Midwestern recruits who grew up in a football-first culture of farm town work ethic and Friday night lights. Nebraska could stock its roster with homegrown talent that competed nationally because the game rewarded size, mass, and relentless conditioning rather than speed or spread schemes that would later favor coastal athletes. Osborne's program capitalized on this regional advantage. The cream rose to the top in a state where football was religion. Far less discussed is the pharmacological undercurrent. Nebraska pioneered modern strength and conditioning under Boyd Epley, but the program also operated in an era when anabolic steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs, were widespread, sometimes legal, and frequently overlooked. Osborne publicly condemned steroids and instituted testing after admissions of isolated use surfaced in the mid-1980s. Yet allegations persisted. A former Auburn strength coach claimed he sold steroids to Nebraska players in 1983. A 1989 book detailed drug use and performance payments, and former players and observers have long whispered that Nebraska was ahead of the curve on chemical enhancement before stricter NCAA enforcement. When rules tightened, the program allegedly adapted, hiding use, shielding athletes, and maintaining plausible deniability. Osborne's staff knew the landscape. The lines blurred between legal supplementation and prohibited substances. Success, critics argue, owed as much to chemistry as to coaching genius. Compounding this were persistent claims of under-the-table benefits. While Osborne's tenure avoided the headline-grabbing scandals of some rivals, Nebraska faced NCAA penalties for ticket distribution. 1986, affecting dozens of players, and later self-reported violations involving extra textbook purchases. Former players alleged cash, cars, loans, and electronics funneled through alumni networks and business interests eager to see the program thrive because a winning Huskers team lifted the state's economy. Whether overt, pay-for-play, or coordinated, taking care of the boys, the ecosystem, alumni, administration, and boosters operated with a tacit understanding that elite talent required elite incentives. Osborne benefited from this protective Nebraska culture, a football-first state that shielded its program while competitors faced harsher scrutiny. The strange moral crusades, porn, perversion, and public image. In the late 1990s, Osborne became the face of the Real Men Don't Use Porn campaign, posters, billboards, and PSAs featuring the coach decrying pornography with the gravity of a moral authority. For a man whose public brand was quiet Christian rectitude, the choice struck many as oddly specific and tone-deaf. The campaign invited immediate jokes. What exactly qualified the longtime coach as an expert? How much film study had occurred in the Nebraska video rooms? The juxtaposition was jarring. The program's players and coaches were not monks. Accounts, some confirmed, many whispered, described a culture of young men behaving like young men, alongside coaches with documented personal issues ranging from hot-headedness to more lurid private conduct. Osborne's anti-porn stance became fodder for satire precisely because it clashed with the program's real-world reputation. Teammates. From PR mentoring to institutional power, Osborne and his wife Nancy launched Teammates in 1991 as a modest player mentoring initiative, standard college athlete community service for positive press. It grew into a statewide nonprofit with millions in public funding, over $12 million in state grants in recent years, comprising 80% of certain mentorship allocations. What began as football players helping kids evolved into a professionalized network of adult mentors, staff, directors, and outreach. Critics contend it morphed further. Promotional materials and programming now emphasize social issue, curricula, alternative lifestyles, identity politics, and progressive frameworks, delivered through one-on-one relationships. A former player serving in leadership has drawn fire for activist rhetoric perceived as anti-white in a state with predominantly white youth participants. Reports of questionable mentor conduct and overreach have surfaced, though defenders insist the core mission remains youth support. Osborne remains publicly tied to the organization, issuing PSAs and appearing at events. Whether he steers the ship or merely lends his name, the program's transformation raises questions about legacy oversight. COVID advocacy. Another PSA, another controversy. In December 2021, Osborne lent his voice to a public service video produced by UNMC and Nebraska Medicine. Getting the vaccine is the right thing to do for all Nebraskans. The beloved coach urged adults, and by extension, families and innocent children to line up, capitalizing on the same trust he built over decades. Subsequent data on vaccine efficacy, side effects, and policy overreach have fueled retrospective criticism. Others saw the pandemic fraud from the beginning and tried to warn their family, friends, and neighbors, but they faced an onslaught of lies and propaganda from so-called state leaders like Tom Osborne. Many now view the campaign as emblematic of try-hard elitist figures and self-righteous know-it-alls promoting interventions they did not fully understand. For skeptics, Osborne's involvement exemplified how Nebraska's football saint was once again deployed to nudge public behavior on a topic far removed from his expertise. Congress. Votes that sent Nebraskans to die. Osborne's 6 years in Congress coincided with the post-9/11 wars. He voted yeah on the 2001 authorization for use of military force Afghanistan, the 2002 Iraq War resolution, and multiple supplemental funding bills totaling hundreds of billions. These conflicts, sold on intelligence, later discredited, cost thousands of American lives, including at least 3 Nebraskans during his tenure. Broader tallies during the period he supported: roughly 630 U.S. deaths in Afghanistan and 3,000 in Iraq. Civilian casualties abroad numbered in the tens of thousands, breeding resentment that critics link to later migration patterns and security challenges. The financial toll exceeded $2 trillion. Osborne, the former coach revered for protecting his players, backed open-ended commitments that delivered death notices to Nebraska families. The war's justifications crumbled. The human cost did not. The pattern: figurehead, quiet stooge, or simply overrated. A recurring observation from those who have met Osborne, especially lifelong Nebraskans expecting the towering intellect behind 255 wins, is how ordinary, even limited, he appears in person. He is famously reserved, often flanked by handlers who speak for him or script his remarks. Public appearances frequently reduce him to a silent presence or brief, repetitive platitudes. Critics argue this reveals a man less a strategic mastermind than a fortunate beneficiary of timing, institutional protection, and a state eager to mythologize its football coach. The pattern across domains: PD-era advantages, payments ecosystem, moral grandstanding, charitable expansion into politics, vaccine advocacy, and war votes, suggests decisions shaped by circumstance, deference to powerful networks, or external direction rather than penetrating insight. Wins on the field translated into blanket moral authority. That authority was then lent to causes with questionable outcomes for children, soldiers, and the public. Osborne is human. Every leader accumulates missteps. Yet the hagiography that surrounds him in Nebraska has long obscured a fuller reckoning. His triumphs were real, but so were the shortcuts, the strange public crusades, the institutional entanglements, and the votes with body counts. The deeper dive reveals not a flawless icon, but a man whose legend was burnished by a perfect storm of Midwestern football culture, chemical eras, alumni largesse, and political deference. Nebraska's favorite son deserves scrutiny as rigorous as the admiration he receives. Only then does the full, complicated record emerge.